Welcome everyone to a conversation about childhood and COVID. My name is Ellen Birnbaum. I am the Director of Childhood Programs here at the 92nd Street Y, and formerly the Director at the 92nd Street Y Nursery School. I have been here for 38 years, and it's my great pleasure today to welcome Dr. Shefali Tsabary, who is a specialist in early childhood and childhood psychology, integrating Eastern and Western philosophy, a best-selling author, and also raising a teenage daughter, which is very brave. Renee Jain has her master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania, is the psychologist and founder of Go Zen. Perfect, we need it right now, and an expert in technology and social and emotional learning. Dr. Laura Markham is an author and PhD in clinical psychology and the founder of AHA Parenting, and also is the mother of 2 adult children. Renee and Shefali have recently co-authored Superpowered Transforming Anxiety into Courage. Courage is something we all need right now very badly. And I think we can get started with a question I'm going to throw to the whole panel, which is, what is the most appropriate way to talk to children about COVID? Of course, taking into account their age and stage of development.
Well, I'll start. I think my focus is on the parents' sense of equanimity around it. And I always tell parents that before you start speaking to your children, to check your own anxiety around it. And if you have, as the parent, an unmitigated anxiety and a sense of doom around it, then no matter how reassuring your words sound, that anxiety is going to be picked up by your children. So I always encourage parents to, maybe join a support group or get some help to really enter a place of your own zen or neutrality around COVID. It's scary. It's definitely something that you need to acknowledge one's own anxiety, but you can't succumb to the anxiety, because if you do, your children will absorb it and you will add to your children's sense of unease around this. So for the parent to really tune into their own anxiety, to own it, to acknowledge it, but then also to find ways to cope with it before speaking to their children. And I'll leave it to the panel to talk about exactly how to talk to the children.
Since we're in the middle of the pandemic, it's not just beginning. Every parent's already talked to their children to some degree, right? So now what we're finding is that children are reaching their limit. They already know there's a pandemic. They already know they can't visit grandma. They already know they can't go to school. They can't even go to the playground. They can't see their friends. And so what we're seeing is children who are having a very hard time. So one mom told me that her daughter came running up to her and punched her and yelled, "I hate you." And of course, the mother was completely, like, it was out of nowhere, right? And didn't know what to do, but took a deep breath and said, "We'll talk about this later," and walked away. And then she was on a Zoom call, the mother, because she has to work. And her daughter came into the bedroom where the mom's on the Zoom call, came up behind her, sat down on the bed, and began to weep. Just weep. So here's the mom on the Zoom call, and behind her is the daughter weeping. The mom got off the Zoom call and went and comforted her daughter, and her daughter sobbed for half an hour and said, "I hate this. When will this go away, this virus?" This child is 6, right? So what we're finding is that it's not so much giving children information at this point. It's helping them with all of the feelings they have about it. And we know that when kids have big feelings, they usually act them out. It'd be great if they could put them into words, but they don't. They can't. Anything they can't articulate, they will express through their actions, like punching their mother. So I think we have to be aware that our children are having a hard time. And when they give us a hard time of any kind, we have to be aware that something unusual is going on. It's unprecedented, and they're acting out. So how do you talk to them? You say, you are having such a hard time. This isn't what you wanted to have happen. It's so disappointing not to be able to see your friend. You really wish we could see grandma. I know you miss the playground. We just acknowledge everything they're telling us. And once they have a chance to grieve, remember, grieving has several different components. Grieving, we get angry, we go into denial, we bargain. Well, maybe I could just go to the playground for a little while, right? We lash out. There are all kinds of things that happen with grieving, and we cry. So once kids grieve, they're a lot better behaved. So yes, we can explain the pandemic, but I think much more important is we listen to what children are telling us, and we help them to work through their feelings.
We were talking earlier about, checking your own emotions as a parent. But I think also your facial expression, your body language, and to the point where, yes, we've been living with this a long time, and just listening and being aware of our children.
But Renee works directly with how to talk to children. So Renee, tell us about what you found effective.
Yeah, so one thing is we have to be very, very good listeners of our children, because as has been noted, they pick up a lot of information, not just from what we're saying, but our body language and also our energy. So we always start with, so what do you know? What have you heard? And just asking them openly what they think, because there is probably quite a bit of distortion, or there may be quite a bit of distortion in what they know and what they don't know. And there are a lot of missing pieces for them. So that's the first place to start. What have you guys heard? And then another thing is to really, because I don't think we can insulate them from the fear and from the anxiety, whether you're turning the news off all the time or you're being as positive as you can about it. They are feeling it from many, many different areas. And so really to be clear on what the similarities are between them and someone experiencing COVID, and maybe the differences, so that they can have an understanding that most people do get well. Sometimes this affects people who have something else going on with them. So they understand kind of the similarities and the differences between themselves and maybe somebody who hasn't had a great experience. Again, starting point is always, what do you know and what have you heard?
What have you know? What have you heard? And then Renee and I have worked with so many parents, helping them sitting with their children's anxiety. Our instinct is to fix it. And the goal is not necessarily to fix it, because our children will, like Laura said, constantly bring these things up in waves. So there's no end point to fix. So we need to allow the space of constant communication. Like Renee said, what did you hear today? Or what are you feeling today? And to constantly check in and allow our children to express whatever they may be feeling. Their main radar, though, will be the parents' compass. And if the parents' compass is set to stability, creativity, connection, then the children will have a greater likelihood to reset their needle toward optimism and a sense of comfort.
Yes, I love that. I think in this situation, even more than many other situations that our kids come to us with fears, this is a situation where we want to allay the fear often, as opposed to holding space, where we want to fix it immediately. Don't worry, you're fine. Trust me, nothing's going to happen. We've got this. And while we want to do that, I do think that holding space for them to process these big fears and these anxieties is huge for them. We need to not dismiss the anxiety that they probably have around this. And it's great to be able to openly listen to it. And if we need to, because a lot of us need practice in this, no matter how practiced you are, pick up a line, use a line over and over again. Like, yeah, that sounds really hard. That could be tough. Pick up a listening mantra. I hear what you're saying. If you tend to jump in and want to sort of fix for your kids.
I think what you're modeling and what there's almost an opportunity for right now is building our resiliency. And I'm seeing that through this whole crisis, that while there's so many downsides to it, there's also opportunities that families are having now that they're spending as much time together as they are, which kind of brings me to my next question, which is this pressure of juggling work and managing your children at these different ages and stages. And what would be your advice in terms of trying to achieve some balance and also some self-care for parents so that they can get through this time?
Well, I think because it's such an unprecedented moment, parents have to allow for this adjustment. And if we demand the same level of perfectionism and achievement from ourselves or our children as we did pre-COVID, we would not be attuned to the high stress of this moment. This is unprecedented stress. It demands a different level of adaptation and coping, and a release of expectations, a release of perfectionism, a release of control. And we need to back off our children and ourselves a little bit and simply not expect that we can perform at levels we did pre-COVID. It's simply, it's never going to happen. So when the parent has the right mindset that we cannot achieve and perform at the levels that we thought we could, then automatically they enter this sense of ease and can develop a sense of creativity around the situation, of spontaneity, and reframe the situation for each individual child and family. This is now, we are no longer in an institutionalized educational system anymore. We're learning from home. We have to adapt to every child's ease with this distance learning. The parent is learning from home. They're in their pajamas all day. Things are different now. So parents have to be creative and adapt. It has to come with a release of expectations. And we cannot, think we are pre-COVID during COVID. We have to come up with new ways of being, which demand creativity and spontaneity.
There is a lot of self-criticism right now going on. There is a lot of blame. There is a lot of just feeling bad about the lack of motivation and lack of productivity during this time. And so, just building upon what Dr. Shefali said, for my personal family, we were in survival mode for the first few months. And it took me a couple of weeks to become aware of the fact that we were in that mode. It was because my husband and I both run our own businesses. My kids were in school and they're 6 and 7, so they're young. My kindergartner was transitioning into doing Zoom classes and getting all the videos and getting the homework done, etc. And so every day I had to set the bar lower and lower and lower in terms of what could be accomplished, till I got to the point where I woke up and I realized, you know what? Today, I'm going to try to love my child, and I'm going to try to love myself, and we're going to feed each other, and that's going to be what we call success, right? I mean, basic survival mode. Now, things have been transitioning as we've been in this for longer, and we've adapted to certain things. We've figured out certain things. Amazing. Humans are amazing. And now my kids, for example, are out of school, and many kids are not in school at this time. And so our routines have changed, but I believe that is the core, like what Dr. Shefali said about setting expectations and what is realistic in this time, because that's what's going to have the trickle down effect, because the stress is coming from the expectation being one thing and the reality being one thing. And there is this big gap in between that is causing all of the stress. And so really we need to bridge the gap.
It's an impossible situation for most parents. They're in lockdown 24/7 with a child. They are often trying to hold down a job at the same time. Sometimes it's a single parent or one parent caring for at least one child, and sometimes more than one child, all day without any breaks. So I would say parents just have to give themselves some grace, and give their partner some grace, and give their children some grace. And I would say, if you want to focus on what will make life better during this difficult time, I would say let the academics go, because we as a society will have to come up with a better answer for how to be educating our kids virtually. And instead, think about how you can replenish yourself today, you, the parent, because if you can if you can replenish yourself and feel centered, you'll be able to be emotionally generous to your child. And that's, after all, what children need from us more than anything. Because what I'm hearing from parents is this is a tough time for them, but what their children are getting out of it depends so much on what the parent is feeling like. Because imagine our children looking back on this in future years. What they'll remember is that they got to go for a walk every evening with mom or dad, that they got to roughhouse and play games, that they got extra time with mom and dad, that mom and dad were really there for them. So yeah, there was a pandemic, but what mattered most to them was the connection in their family.
The parents are telling me that they're struggling with their workplace situations because some people have children at home and some don't. And there's the same expectation for everyone. So, encouraging parents to talk to their employers about, what's reasonable right now. And again, lowering what you said about lowering that expectation and not setting yourself up for something that you can't possibly achieve right now. But I do hear that.
What Dr. Shefali said earlier about the parents setting the compass, or really setting the tone for their family. This is experienced by employers. Employers need to set the tone for their employees. Schools need to set the tone for their kids. This needs to happen in many different ways, because we might say as parents, you know what, I'm setting the tone for my kids. However, I have an employer that's breathing down my back to get them work. And if they haven't set the tone, you're in trouble, right? You're still going to feel that pressure.
Absolutely. And, I'm thinking about it in my workplace. The faculties of all these schools had to change on a dime in March from being in person to teaching virtually. And not all the children respond to virtual learning. I thought we could talk about that a little bit, and what you see and what your practices have shown, or how we can help parents, even though school is out right now. Some camps are virtual, and there will be re-entry at some point into school. So maybe we could segue into that.
In the United States at this point, most kids are not learning online, thank goodness, anymore, because it just wasn't age appropriate for young children to be on a screen. And they had a very hard time with it. Most of the parents I spoke with, their children were having a hard time, and it took a lot of superhuman effort on the part of the parent to keep the child focused and being able to do their work online. And that was pretty hard for parents. So when schools open in the fall, which hopefully will happen, children are going to need some support going back into the classroom, because it will be not the classroom they left. There will be social distancing. So I've been hearing from parents in places like Italy that went through the pandemic earlier and reopened earlier, that when the kids started school again, they were completely taken aback. When they went into the classroom, they wanted to hug their friends. They couldn't touch their friends. They were not supposed to shout, because shouting could make the virus more likely to get communicated, right? So it isn't just words that are getting communicated. When you use a loud voice, you're projecting. So children in Italy and in other countries where I spoke to parents were finding that they were coming home and saying they didn't want to go back to school. They would go to the lunchroom and they wouldn't be allowed to talk to the other kids. They wouldn't be allowed to run around. Recess was often canceled. Kids can't sit and focus on learning when they don't have time during their day to run around. And children need to feel connected to their teachers. And teachers are wearing masks. So the teacher didn't even look like herself. And that was when they had a teacher they already knew. So in the new school year, going and meeting a teacher you have no connection with, and she's trying to form a bond with all of her new students, and she's wearing a mask. It's pretty difficult. So I think, again, parents have to be aware that children are going to have big reactions to this. And practically speaking, we have to prepare our kids for what it will be like. The school has to prepare the parents have to prepare the children. The parents have to talk to the kids about how they might feel, what will happen if there's no resource, what will happen at lunch, what will happen when they see their friends. Do they have to wave? Can they just send a kiss? I mean, what can they send love? We know that when a human sends love to another person, we, the sender, feel it. So it's good for the child to be sending that love, and the friend will see them doing it, and so it is strengthening the relationship between the two children, even if they can't touch. So I think children will need a lot of coaching about how to adapt to our new situation.
I hear often from parents, I didn't know that they could do this, or I noticed that they're really in love right now with this particular story, and they're asking me to read it over and over again. So I think there's a lot of positivity that's coming out of this experience. Do you see that in your practice?
Yeah, I think sometimes we look for positivity and we don't need to. I think we don't need to look for positivity because uh, it denotes in some way a fear of quote unquote the difficulty. And I think we can say this is difficult. And the beauty of this moment is that we can get through difficult things. And I think a lot of people try to paint it as positive, and children are like, this is not positive. And I think the positive thing about it is we don't need to paint it as positive, but see the strength in acknowledging that we can adapt to difficult things. I think that's the message of this time for me, is not to try to make it positive or turn it or spin it, to instead acknowledge this is so difficult and we're doing it every day, because this has been so hard for families. Parents are burning out, parents are out of jobs, children are isolated.
Yeah.
There's no spinning this. It's difficult, but the positive part of it is that we can do difficult things together, we can get through it, and it's okay. Life doesn't always have to be rainbows and skittles. It can be this, and we can get through this together. And the positivity comes from that acknowledgement, comes from that understanding that pain is part of life and that we can get through painful things.
Yeah, I think there's a huge lesson to be taken from that. I think it's very important that if we are, having a gratitude practice with our kids, or we're saying, let's look at the silver lining in some of this, that we're not dismissing the pain. Because what happens when, just think about yourself, when you have something that's painful and you want someone to hear, and they're like, it's okay, you have so many other good things in your life. You feel that you're not heard and you're not seen. And this pain that we are all collectively experiencing, it needs to be seen. It needs to be heard, And so I think that it's really important that we acknowledge and leave space for what's going on. And then I just wanted to really just quickly say, in terms of, online schooling for kids, for very little kids, it is not developmentally appropriate to be on Zoom, to be having conference calls. It's just not right for their brain, frankly. I will stand on that. They can't read facial expressions. They're often muted for, dozens of minutes at a time. It is very difficult for them. So we also need to see those difficulties and then check the systems. Is this right for a 6-year-old, for a 7-year-old, for an 8-year-old, for a 9-year-old? Probably not, for the most part. The loss of human contact is very, very hard for them.
Yeah, I was just going to end with a little bit about that kind of isolation that they're feeling, and that they're mourning not being in place with teachers and with their friends, and how parents can help support them, aside from listening, which is, of course, the first and most important thing to do.
I think we need to allow for a wide expression of what we would normally call negative behaviors, but now we see them as appropriate behaviors given the hardship, such as children being irritable, distractible, procrastinating, may look to us as being lazy, avoidant, withdrawing, teenagers slamming doors, they're angry, they're short. The gamut of what we would normally label very freely pre-COVID now needs to be seen in its context and understood as coping strategies in place and in attempt. And of course, off base and falling short, but really in attempt. And when we can understand our children are acting out and not really understanding that they're even acting out, then we can pause as parents and not react to it as we would typically do. Instead, allow for it and not condone it. We can check it, but we're not diagnosing it, we're not reacting against it, we're not controlling it or punishing it. We're having a compassionate, empathic answer to them that we get it. This is hard, and you're expressing your discontent, your misalignment, your loss, your grieving through these means.
I think you've all shared such wonderful advice. I'm mindful of the time. So with great gratitude from the 92nd Street Y to all of you for sharing the expertise and the knowledge that you have around children and parents. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.